Good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's afternoon for me at least. We're going to go ahead and read chapter 9, and I'm going to post it on. So if there's a little delay in the page changing, please make sure that you have your book out and you're reading along. Let's see how it goes. I'm only going to do one chapter a day in reading, and then I want you to do the questions for that day. And so this week it's going to be chapters 9, 10, and 11. So let's go ahead and get started, okay? I have my water bottle. Let me get another one just in case. Okay, so let's get started. We were led away by two nervous soldiers down farm tracks, through orchards, and across the bridge before being tied up beside a hospital tent some miles from where we had been captured. A knot of wounded soldiers gathered around us at once. They patted and stroked us, and I began to whisk my tail with impatience. I was hungry, thirsty, and angry that I had been separated from my trooper Warren. Still, no one seemed to know quite what to do with us, until an officer in a long gray coat with a bandage around his head emerged from the tent. He was an immensely tall man, standing a full head taller than anyone around him. The manner of his gait and the way he held himself indicated a man clearly accustomed to wielding authority. A bandage came down over one eye, so that he had only half a face visible. As he walked towards us, I saw that he was limping. That one foot was heavily bandaged, and that he needed the support of a stick. The soldier sprang back at his approach and stood stiffly to attention. He looked at us, both over in undisguised admiration, shaking his head and sighing as he did so. Then he turned to the men. There are hundreds like these dead out on our wire. I tell you, if we had one jot of the courage of these animals, we would be in Paris by now and not slugging it out here in the mud. These two horses came through hellfire to get here. They were the only two to make it. It was not their fault they were sent on a fool's errand. But they are not circus animals. They are heroes. Do you understand? Heroes. And they should be treated as such. And you stand around and gawk at them. None of you are badly wounded, and the doctor is far too busy to see you at present. So I want these horses unsaddled, rubbed down, fed, and watered at once. They will need oats and hay and a blanket for each of them. Now get moving. The soldiers hurried away, scattering in all directions, and within a few minutes, Topthorn and I were being lavished with all manner of clumsy kindness. None of them had handled a horse before, it seemed, but that did not matter to us. So grateful were we for all the food they brought us and the water. We lacked for nothing that morning. And all the time, the tall officer supervised from under the trees, leaning on his stick. From time to time, he would come up to us and run his hand along our backs and over our quarters, nodding his approval and lecturing his men on the fine points of horse breeding as he examined us. After a time, he was joined by a man in a white coat who emerged from the tent. His hair disheveled, his face pale with exhaustion. There was blood on his coat. Headquarters phoned through about the horses, Herr Hampton, said the man in white. and they say I am to keep them for the stretcher cases. I know your view on the matter, Hampton, but I'm afraid you cannot have them. We need them here desperately. And the way things are going, I fear we will need more. That was just the first attack. There will be more to come. We expect to sustain offensive. It will be a long battle. We are the same on both sides. Once we start something, we seem to have no proof. We seem to have to prove a point, and that takes time and lives. We will need all the ambulance support we can get, motorized or horse. The tall officer drew himself up to his full height and bristled with indignation. He was a formidable sight, and he advanced on the man in white. Doctor, you cannot put fine British cavalry horses to pulling carts. Any of our horse regiment, my own regiment of lancers, would be proud, indeed overwhelmed, to have such splendid creatures in their ranks. You cannot do it, Doctor. I will not permit it. Herr Hampton, said the doctor patiently. He was clearly not at all intimidated. Do you really imagine, after this morning's madness, that either side will be using cavalry again in this war? Can you not understand that we need transport? Herr Hampton, we need it now. There are men, brave men, German and English, lying out there on stretchers in the trenches. At present, there's not enough transport to bring them back to the hospital here. Now, do you want them all to die, Herr Hampton? Tell me that. Do you want them to die? If these horses could be hitched up to a cart, they could bring them back in dozens. We just don't have enough ambulances to cope. And what we do have break down or get stuck in the mud. Please, Herr Hampton, we need your help. The world, said the German officer, shaking his head. The world has gone quite mad when noble creatures such as these are forced to become beasts of burden. The world has gone mad, but I can see that you are right. I am a lancer, Herr Doctor, but even I know that men are more important than horses. But you must see to it that you have someone in charge of these two who knows horses. I don't want any dirty-fingered mechanic getting his hands on these two. And you must tell them they are riding horses. They won't take kindly to pulling carts, no matter how noble the cause. Thank you, Herr Hampton, said the doctor. You are most kind, but I have a problem, Herr Hampton. As I am sure you will agree, they will need an expert to manage them, to start with, particularly if they have never been put in a cart before. The problem is that I have only medical orderlies here. No one. Orderlies here. True, one of them has worked horses on the farm before the war. But to tell you the truth, Herr Hampton, I have no one who could manage these two. No one, that is, except you. You are due to the base hospital on the next convoy of ambulances, but they won't be there before this evening. I know it's a lot to ask a wounded man, but you can see how desperate I am. The farmer down below has several carts, and I should imagine all the harnesses you would need. What do you say, Herr Hampton? Can you help me? The bandage officer limped back towards us and stroked our noses tenderly. Then he smiled and nodded. Very well. It is sacrilege, Doctor. A sacrilege, he said. But if it's got to be done, then I'd rather do it myself and see that it is done properly. So that same afternoon, after our capture, Topthorne and I were hitched up side by side to an old hay cart, and with the officer directing two orderlies, we were driven up through the woods, back towards the thunder of the gunfire and the wounded that awaited us. Topthorne was all the time in a great state of alarm, for it was clear he had never pulled before in his life. And at last I was able, in my turn, to help him, to lead, to compensate, and to reassure him. The officer led us down at first, limping along beside me with his stick. But he was soon confident enough to mount the cart with the two orderlies and take the reins. "You've done this a bit before, my friend," he said. "I can tell that. I always knew the British were crazy. Now that I know that they use horses such as you as cart horses, I am quite sure of it. That's what this war is all about, my friend. It's about which of us is the crazier. And clearly, you British started with an advantage. You were crazy beforehand." All that afternoon and evening, while the battle raged, we trudged up to the lines, loaded up with stretchers, and brought them back to the field hospital. It was several miles each way over roads and tracks filled with shell holes and littered with corpses of mules and men. The artillery barrage from both sides was continuous. It roared overhead all day as the armies hurled their men at one another, across no man's lands. And the wounded that could walk poured back along the roads. I had seen the same gray faces looking out from under their helmets somewhere before. All that was different was the uniforms. They were gray now with red piping, and the helmets were no longer round with broad trim. It was almost night before the tall officer left us, waving goodbye to us and to the doctor from the back of the ambulance as it bumped its way across the field and out of sight. The doctor turned to the orderlies who had been with us all day. "See to it that they are well cared for, these two," he said. "They saved good lives today, those two, good German lives and good English lives. They deserve the best of care. See to it they have it." For the first time that night, since we came to the war, Topthorne and I had the luxury of a stable. The shed in the farm that lay across the field from the hospital was emptied of pigs and poultry, and we were led in to find a rack brimming full with sweet hay and buckets of soothing cold water. That night, after we had finished our hay, Topthorne and I were laying down together at the back of the shed. I was half awake and could think only of my aching muscles and sore feet. Suddenly, the door creaked open and the stable was filled with a flickering orange light. Behind the indeed overwhelmed to have such splendid creatures in their ranks. "You cannot do it, doctor. I will not permit it." "Herr Hampton," said the doctor politely. He was clearly not at all intimidated. "Do you really imagine, after this morning's madness, that either side will be using cavalry again in this war? Can you not understand that we need transport, Herr Hampton?" Oh. Hold on. Oh, I've got duplicate pages. I'm sorry. Let's try that again. Okay, so you have a couple of pages that are duplicated. So you need to find page 70. I apologize for that. Okay. So it says the stable was filled with flickering orange light. Behind the light there were footsteps. We looked up, and I was seized at that moment with a kind of panic. For a fleeting moment, I imagined myself back at home in the stable with old Zoe. The dancing light triggered off an alarm in me, reminding me at once of Albert's father. I was on my feet in an instant and backing away from the light with Topthorn beside me, protecting me. However, when the voice spoke, it was not the rasping, drunken voice of Albert's father, but rather a soft, gentle tone of a girl's voice, a young girl. I could see now that there were two people behind the light, an old man, a bent old man in rough clothes and clogs, and beside him stood a young girl, her head and shoulders wrapped in a shawl. "There you are, Grandpapa," she said. "I told you they put them here. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? Oh, can they be mine, Grandpapa? Please, can they be mine?" Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You are going to, if you want to reread this, go ahead and reread it yourself. If you want to listen to this again, you are more than welcome to. But now you need to go and finish, do the assignment for chapter 9. Thank you. Bye.